Good morning. Good morning. So, I'm really excited about our first speaker tonight. This morning. Excuse me. Get the lights up. Thank you. That was a good save. So he's been called the bicycle evangelist by the New York Times. He's been the leader promoting funding for bicycling and walking in Congress, for livable communities, bike share, safe routes to school. He was the first in recent years to call for an increase in the gas tax and a plan for moving beyond it. He coined the term bike partisan, which we all love, and you'll never see him on C-SPAN without his bike pin. Join me in welcoming Representative Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you all. Thanks for the warm welcome, and thanks for being here this morning. Cycling is serious business. You have an opportunity to hit Capitol Hill at a time, you may have noticed there's a little bit of controversy here. People don't always get along real well. But that's, I think, precisely why your being here is so important. Everybody's got a bicycle story. Everybody. Bike partisanship is not just a slogan, but it is a concept that people can relate to. It's one of the things that brings people together in sometimes contentious times. Bicycling remains the most efficient form of urban transportation ever designed. If you outline the list of challenges that each community faces, whether it's health, congestion, economic development, carbon pollution, cycling is part of the solution. And in terms of the impact per dollar invested, cycling, I think, has the highest rate of return of anything that the men and women on Capitol Hill that you may visit, the highest rate of return of anything that they would be asked to do. I hope that we will be aggressively pleasant, but insistent that people understand the opportunity. I am concerned that in some cases, people are a little less enthusiastic about the federal role. They are appalled that although, and I understand the Secretary had some nice things to say when she joined you yesterday, unfortunately the actions of the administration, zeroing out Tiger grants, the most popular and effective transportation funding program that we have seen. The fact that cycling and modalism is not really part of the infrastructure vision, which actually isn't that bad news because their infrastructure plan ain't going anywhere. But you have an opportunity to fill that void. You have simple, common sense things that you would like to do for the health of our communities, the health of our planet, the independence of our children. It is important for you to tell your story. I'm wearing a gold tie today because I think we ought to go for the gold. This is not a time to just sort of hold back. I think we need to be thoughtful and aggressive in terms of how we deal with new technologies. We've got some work to do with electric assist bicycles, which can be a really terrific thing, or if it's done wrong, can really screw things up. And we need to take that head on working with some of the new businesses, working with local governments, working to make sure that it's integrated in a fashion that enhances the cycling experience for all, rather than compromising it. It's important that we look at what is happening in some communities across the country, because we're looking at vehicle mile traveled going up again. We're looking at a recent decrease in terms of the cycling participation. We need to dig into that, figure out what's going on, work to reverse it. But there are a series of things that we're looking at that can help reverse that. One of the things I am most excited about is the Vision Zero program. The simple concept that we should refuse to accept carnage on our streets for cyclists and pedestrians. Speed kills. And we're watching efforts across the country to be able to redirect that, to be able to lower speeds. Although, ironically, in some cases, we have to fight with state authorities and weird speed boards, and the fact that people confuse speed with access, speed with the quality of the experience. But people are starting to understand. Being able to lower speeds, to be able to make people safer, to have change the quality of the experience on our public rights-of-way is important. And having a comprehensive effort in every community to reduce deaths to zero is an objective we all can and should embrace. People will be stunned at what's possible. And we've seen it in a number of communities, and that ought to be our goal. It's important to make sure, as we are working across the country with local transportation funding packages, that you are part of the mix. I was pleased in my state, where recently there was a major state transportation package that was developed, that cyclists were at the table in terms of the contours of that proposal. I am pleased that I am watching, as I go around the country, that there are political action committees organized around advocacy for bikes and pedestrians, for safe streets. It may not be the biggest political action committee, but it counts. That endorsement, that engagement, getting the attention of politicians and people in the community is the first step towards being able to change the mindset of politicians and the engagement of the public. And it matters. I'm keenly interested here in Capitol Hill to have our Bike Share Transit Act, which would allow bike sharing systems to be eligible for federal transit dollars. Now, make no mistake, in a couple minutes I'm going to rush to Capitol Hill to argue for more transportation dollars overall, which we need. I mean, I have been reintroducing the first gas tax increase in 25 years. My message for everybody who cares about rebuilding and renewing America, who says they're in favor of infrastructure, who says they're in favor of safety and transit and cycling, show me the money. Don't tell us that you're supportive unless you're willing to say where you're going to get the resources. And it is important that we, as one of our former presidents would say, make the pie higher. Because we don't want to have a food fight where we're having the truckers versus the AAA versus local governments versus transit agency versus cyclists fighting over table scraps. That's not the key for success. Being able to adequately fund the system and make sure everybody's playing a part of that role makes all the difference in the world. It's important that we continue to advocate for cycling as part of the solution for whatever ails the community. Do not be shy. Do not be unduly patient. Be respectful. If you get stuck talking to a member of the House or Senate, make the best of it. But zero in on the certified smart young people who really run the place. Today, I'm joined by John Bosworth from my office. John's around here someplace. He's sort of the waving in the back of the room. John is the unofficial executive secretary of the Congressional Bicycle Caucus. Along with my co-chair, Vern Buchanan from Sarasota, Florida. The caucus is bipartisan. It is important to be able to help the people on the congressional staffs to understand who you are, what you stand for, and to make the connection. And one of the things I hope you will do is be persistent in encouraging members and staff to join you back home to look at some of the projects you're proud of and to look at some of the areas that are lethal, that need attention. Now, right now, I'll guarantee you that there are people in every office who are looking at the congressional schedule, which is, of course, available to you, and they have these congressional recess periods where, regardless of what the public thinks, they actually are working periods, and people go home and they are doing things. And there's a district director, there's a chief of staff that's scratching their heads saying, what am I going to do with her for a full week in May? You know, it's something, it ought to be something that she enjoys. It ought to be something that makes a difference for the community. Maybe it's got some media attention. Anybody have any ideas about what to recommend for a tour in your community in terms of not just Bike to Work Day, but that's a good one, but being able to have something that will illustrate what you are doing and what difference the federal government's partnership has made or could make going forward. And I've watched this work. I mean, I remember we had a couple of television cameras with Tammy Baldwin in Dane County in Wisconsin. We had one with Emmanuel Cleaver in Kansas City, where actually this was a little embarrassing because Congressman Cleaver hadn't been on a bike for a while, and there were several television cameras, but it was the initiation of the bike path, and people cared, and he loved it. And involving young people, schools, parents who are concerned about safety, or maybe there's a little bit of bike tourism to show off. This is all part of your work. and I hope you won't be bashful, reaching out to involve the people here on Capitol Hill in being able to understand it, to live it, and help it. Don't give up on the federal government. Times are a-changing. There will be a new Congress. There will be another administration. But one thing's not going to change, and that is the central role that cycling plays now in America, and an even better role that it will play in the future with all your help. Thank you very much. I just got all carried away. Making the introduction all the more dramatic. No. Elizabeth Esty, who is not the most senior member of Congress, but I think one of the people who made an impact from the moment she arrived. She's playing a key role on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. She's been trying to get people to be serious about resource investment and doing so on a bipartisan basis. And she's got a couple of ideas she's going to share with you today in terms of being able to make the case more effectively with a little pilot project she's working on, and probably other things. May I introduce my friend and colleague from Connecticut, Elizabeth Esty.
Good morning, and thank you. I mean, you know, you have the bike champion, right? So let's, another round of applause for Earl, who makes sure that every member of Congress is adorned with a plastic bike. But they need to get on a real one, right? Need to get on a real one. I have a phrase for you, Earl, before you go. I think it needs to be bike partisan. Bipartisan, bike partisan legislation. That's what we need, all right? So we're looking on bike partisan legislation. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Earl. Thank you to the League of American Bicyclists, to Bill and to Carol, and especially to my good friend Earl. I'm heading from here, and I have to leave a bit early because I found out last night that I get to do the initial introduction and grilling of Elaine Chao this morning when she introduces the president's proposal to the Transportation Committee. So I'm ducking out a little bit early. I understand she was in here yesterday, so I hope you'll forgive me on that. But I wanted to tell you just a couple of three little quick vignettes about what really inspires me about being here this morning. First, when I was a young lawyer here in Washington, a good friend of mine loved to ride his bike. He rode his bike to work from Alexandria until one day he didn't make it to work. He was hit by a car. He's paralyzed from the neck down. He was 30 years old. He was doing what a lot of us believe you ought to be able to do. He lived close enough to be able to bike, 4 or 5 miles into Washington. And that was before the traffic is as bad as it was now. And he nearly lost his life and has spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair because of that, because we didn't do a good enough job on bike safety. The second is that my kids helped us pick where we lived when we moved from Washington back to Connecticut because we were close to a bike trail. The Farmington Canal Trail in Connecticut, it's part of the East Coast Greenway. Go give it up for the East Coast Greenway. And my kids all learned to ride their bikes. We are a mile from the Farmington Canal. My husband sometimes commutes 15 miles to New Haven, especially, and sometimes by cross-country skiing and sometimes by bike. So it is an awesome, great exercise area for young and old, people in wheelchairs, little kids, people out walking their dogs. It is an enormously vital part of our community. plays a real role for people riding their bikes, for recreation, for getting out in nature. And so we should never talk about that when you're talking to members of Congress, the importance that those trails play. And the last is an issue near and dear to me. I was elected in 2012, and 6 weeks after I was elected, I was sitting, new member of Congress training. They have these things. It doesn't appear, I know, when you see us not functioning, but they actually do have training for us. And on my very last day, I was sitting in a classroom at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and my phone started exploding with texts and phone calls from my district, from Newtown, Connecticut, on December 14th, 2012. And so among the many things that have sprung out of that work is a good friend of mine, Monty Frank, who's a very, very dedicated cyclist, has organized a group of Team 26 of riders from across the country who ride from Connecticut down to Washington, D.C., through communities all up and down the eastern seaboard to ride for gun safety. And they do see that impact of where it's safe to ride and where it's not. They ride through inner cities where it's not even safe for anybody to be on the streets. And part of the reason to have bikes on the streets is it makes us sure that the streets are safer for everyone, for people who are walking or playing, kids in parks, and moms and dads and grandparents sitting on front steps and sitting on porches. So bikes are part of the solution of healing our communities, as well as allowing us to be healthier. It's for healthier, better communities. And so that's part of my enthusiasm about bikes, because I see bikes as playing a role in all of those ways. So I am the vice-ranking member of the Transportation Committee, or I'm referred to as the vice-ranking whatever of the Transportation Committee. But we are working to try to make sure this gets incorporated into any big bills we do on surface transportation. One of the little bills which I'm honored for your support of is called the TASK Act. It's HR 4241, and it's the Transportation Access and Systems Coordination. I have to read this because, you know, they come up. Matt, who's my awesome transportation guy, Matt, stand up. And they have contests for naming bills, so you have to read them out. They just only make sense in the acronyms. But it's really based on this idea that data is powerful. So our bill would have a pilot project for 5 states and 10 MPOs to require the Department of Transportation to share all their data with those communities in those states. Because we know that with good data, you can make better decisions, right? You understand where are people trying to get from and to. And remember, people talk about commuting. 80%, 70 to 80% of all travel is not to and from work. So it's way more than just commuting. I know in Waterbury, Connecticut, the town next to me, one of the biggest issues is for people who are at the community college who can't afford cars. They rely on transit or walking, and sometimes bikes, not this time of year, but when the weather is better, some of them bike. So they need safe paths and they need transit. And so we really need to assess what are the needs, where are people trying to get from and to, and that data we know is going to allow better decision-making in states, better decision-making in communities. And so we're looking to get this pilot bill passed, and then we believe it's going to prove its worth pretty quickly and then expand it. And at that point, we're going to need money. But your support, if that's one of the things you can mention, we have bipartisan support for this legislation. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that you can flag for folks you meet with in Congress. Earl was totally right in what he was talking about in talking to members. Don't be afraid. Number one, they work for you, right? They work for you. You are their boss. Make sure they remember that. You know, you are their boss, and they can't possibly know everything you know about this issue. It's your chance to educate them, help them make better decisions. And truly, you are doing them a favor. I mean, I love it when people come to my office because there's so many things I can't possibly know the details of. So know that there's bipartisan support for this. Earl is right, too. Show me the money. Or conversely, where's the beef? You know, you gotta have real money to fund the programs. It cannot be all Wall Street funding. Believe me, Wall Street is not funding the East Coast Greenway, I can tell you that. You know, we are cobbling together, you know, it is bake sales and it is all kinds of stuff that's raising money right now for our bikes and our trails, but we need real, serious federal investment. And if you could, that might be one of the most important things to tell the folks you meet with, is tell them you can't get something for nothing. And the federal government has a critical role to play, whether it's on bikes or transit or every aspect of surface transportation, making sure we have rail that works and is safe. All of those pieces rely on a federal role to ensure that we have equity for poor communities as well as rich communities, for rural as well as urban. There's a reason the federal government ended up getting into this. It's part of what connects our country. So there's a lot at stake. There's a lot we need to do, but the opportunities are tremendous. You know, the opportunities for a better community, for a better country are right there, but it's gonna take some leadership, and your advocacy is gonna be part of that. We need you. American democracy needs you. It does not work unless people engage. So Earl's completely right. Do not despair. Do not give up. Democracy is at stake. And it only gets fixed when we do this together. It does. We're kind of in a stuck place, but there's bipartisan efforts on transportation, on real funding. I'm the co-chair of a bipartisan group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, our transportation group. I'm co-chair with John Katko, Republican from upstate New York. We will make sure you have access and you can put it on your website, our 13-page detailed proposal about real funding and real solutions to help deal with transportation issues in America. There are paths forward, there really are, but we need to all hold hands together and make that happen. And if you're really good, you can hold hands and ride your bike at the same time. So thank you all very much for your leadership. Appreciate what you bring to the table, and know that we actually can't do our work without input of great citizen activists like you. That's actually how democracy works. Thanks very much, and good luck with your meetings today.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Representative Estee. Thanks. So, I think I lost my paper here. Uh-oh. 1 second. I lost my opening remarks. She took them. I don't have. So I'm sorry. I'm running without my talking points right now. I think the representative took my introduction. So. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. No, so it is really my pleasure to ask Dr. Bella Dinh-Zarr, who is chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. Her work in countless programs, including the CDC, and working on the UN Development Goals to help protect our most vulnerable populations is really inspiring to us. And as a cyclist at the National Transportation Safety Board, we'd love to hear you come and give some remarks to us about how we can move forward in developing this connected, strengthened movement together, and really just come on up. And I'm sorry I don't have any remarks. I don't have any long remarks for you, but we're really excited to have you, and thanks for being here.
I was just going to let him stay up here for a little longer. Actually, I'm very impressed, Bill. Thank you for that very kind introduction, especially without notes. But all you really had to say is that Bella is a bicyclist. So good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here today at the 19th Annual Bike Summit. And I've been following your work, and I know that you've been working for 2 decades, and even longer, many of you, to raise awareness about the importance, the many possibilities, and the positive effects of biking. And that's not only on the transportation system, but on our lives. And today, at this time in our country's history, your work is more important than ever. I'm here today with my colleague, he's just ran off, Dr. Ivan Chung, to tell you more about the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, in hopes that you'll call on us so that we can work together on our common goal of making sure that every person who bicycles makes it home safely. This is my bike, and I love it. It's It's not fancy, it's a single speed, but it's a workhorse. And unlike Ivan, I'm not particularly fast. But it gets me most places where I want and need to go, to the metro, to the museums, and concerts with my family, to work every day, to the grocery store. My husband has biked all his life, and our son has been biking on a 2-wheeler with us since he was 3 years old. And although I began riding my bicycle frequently, daily, just about a decade ago, do you know how I first heard about the advocacy of all of you? It was many years ago. I was still a public health student in Houston, Texas, and I was driving, I'm sorry to say, my large red pickup truck, that's what we drive in Texas, near Rice University, when I saw a group of interesting-looking people. And they were surrounding Meekum Fountain, and they were holding up signs saying, this is the day that we had our first traffic fatality 100 years ago. And it was what's now known as Bike Houston, but it was the Houston Area Bicycle Association. And I got to meet people like a local businesswoman you may know, Regina Garcia. And so they were a small group, but they certainly made an impression on me because of their innovative and, yes, their fun way of raising attention and doing this in a place where every car that passed near the Texas Medical Center could see them. So I've been a believer in the power of the advocacy of the bicycle community now for decades. At the NTSB, we are charged with investigating every civil aviation accident and significant accidents in other modes: highway, rail, pipeline, and marine. We also assist victims and their families after a transportation disaster. Our investigations are conducted so that we can make safety recommendations to prevent future tragedies. And even though road safety is an important part of our mandate, you're probably most familiar with us at the scenes of business jet crashes or maritime disasters, or most recently, several train derailments. Sometimes you'll hear about pipeline spills or a bus crash. We are on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and I did tell Karen that if I'm called, I'm actually on duty right now, but I've made it, so I'm very happy about that. There are 3 board members. 2 slots are currently open. We're hoping those will be filled. So we're on duty once a week, for a week, every 3 weeks. But even when we're not on the scene of a crash, we are having public board meetings, which any of you are welcome to. We are also doing behind-the-scenes work. That includes looking at the evidence, testing materials, and seeking ways to advance our safety recommendations in any way that we can. You see, the NTSB is a non-regulatory agency, so we can't require anyone, we can't require compliance. Our safety recommendations are just that. They're recommendations that we urge anyone, diverse groups, to complete. And we're completely independent, so we can make recommendations to anyone, such as to the Secretary of Transportation or a state agency, a state, a business, associations. We are truly independent, so we don't report to anyone, so that we can make those recommendations in an unbiased way. And fortunately, we're viewed by most, but the public, legislators, the government, as wearing the white hats. So 80% of our recommendations are completed and fulfilled in an acceptable way. Every couple of years, we also issue a most wanted list of transportation priorities. And some of these, but not all of them, are, there we go. So these are issues that we feel will be able to be moved forward if given a good hard push. But these are not all of the issues that we are advocating for. Although bicycles do not appear in their own category, as an agency, and certainly for Ivan and for myself, we are always on the lookout for ways to incorporate the safety of cyclists into our other work. We do this even with NTSB products that at first glance may not seem very relevant. For example, the single unit truck study may not bring cyclists to mind at first, but we actually ended up with 2 recommendations that can have a very positive effect on the safety of people who ride bicycles. These 2 recommendations have to do with requiring trucks to install approved equipment to enhance visibility in blind spots, where bicyclists are often struck. We found in the study that there had been 193 deaths in a certain period where a truck hit a cyclist, usually in a blind spot, and you can see the larger circles where more of the cyclists were hit. We found that we could have a solution, though. Addressing these blind spots was possible, and it was necessary. So we made official recommendations related specifically to bicyclists. There you see the blind spots. So addressing the blind spots could be done through simple equipment, such as enhanced mirrors, or much more advanced equipment, as you see here, such as cameras and radar and automatic braking. And currently, both of the recommendations are classified as still open, but they are still unacceptable. We don't have time to go into all of the studies. This is a speeding study, which Ivan will speak about very thoroughly, since he was one of the main authors, so I'll skip that for now. And we've also done investigations into automated vehicles. Although in this accident investigation, there wasn't anything specific to bicycles, we are keeping a sharp eye on it, because as you know, there is concern about the automation being able to detect the movements of bicyclists. And so we want to make sure that bicyclists are part of the equation in these automated vehicles. So later this morning, you'll be hearing from Ivan about an important study, the speeding study. But I'd like to discuss a crash that occurred in Michigan on June 7th of 2016, in which 5 people died and 4 were seriously injured on their bicycles. I think you probably already know the terrible circumstances. But I think what's important about our investigation, and important to emphasize, is that these 9 cyclists were traveling legally, in a single file, on the paved shoulder, and they were equipped with safety equipment features on their bicycles and on themselves, things such as high visibility clothing, reflective material on their bikes, reflectors, flashers, helmets. In other words, they really were doing everything correctly. Nevertheless, they were struck, they were killed or injured by a driver who was impaired on a variety of substances. NHTSA cites over 800 deaths and 45,000 injuries for bicyclists. The CDC, where I once worked, cites over 1,000 deaths and over 400,000 injuries every year for cyclists. Although the numbers may differ from 2 very reputable sources, I think either set of numbers is just too many. And I should mention, those numbers are higher than in most other entire modes of transportation, and we're only looking at bicycles. But that's why all of you are here today. And I think that's why, in part, that's why you do the work that you do. I'll show you, pass up this a little bit. There we go. So that we don't have to see more of these types of memorials. I know that you advocate very effectively for bicycle issues, but I know that part of that would be also championing other issues that are important to bicyclists, which may not at first glance seem directly related to your work. I mentioned that my background is in injury prevention and public health. Well, in public health, we often say that what's good for the most vulnerable populations is good for everyone. For example, a vaccination program that will reduce the risk of death to children and older people will also reduce illness among the general population. But in transportation, the reverse is also true. What's good for everyone is often good for the most vulnerable road users, if you're really thinking. What's good for everyone in many cases can be good for bicyclists, if we're really thinking. And these present opportunities where you can make a difference, both for our fellow cyclists, but also for everyone at large. Here's just one example. 10,000. That's the number of people who die in alcohol-related crashes every year. And we talked about impairment. Well, for bicycle deaths, we know that about a third of bicycle deaths involve either a driver or a cyclist, or both, who are impaired by alcohol. As bicyclists, I know that we have a unique camaraderie, and that's something that I really love. I mean, how many of you have had a flat tire or just had a chain dislodge and have had several people stop to ask you if something is wrong? I think that stopping to help builds that type of camaraderie, and I love it. Cyclists have a unique and powerful voice because of that. And I think we can and must use it to advance safety, both for specific bicycle issues, but I hope also in general for everyone. And the NTSB, I want to tell you, is here and ready to assist. We have products and information that can assist you. We have things such as in one example, if we're looking just at drunk driving, reports that we do with recommendations. We provide very solid scientific briefing facts. We testify. I was just in Connecticut, actually, yesterday, testifying, and we write op-eds. And we would appreciate your help, too, because although we do wear the white hats, we're often also attacked in this certain environment. In this case, by uninformed opponents, in this case of drunk driving laws, who have the money, for example, to place full-page ads in newspapers. But I'm showing this example because it's one in which the bicyclists made a difference, surprisingly and unexpectedly. Despite spending lots of money, these opponents of safety are no match for advocates like you. In fact, in Utah, when opponents said that a .05 BAC law would hurt tourism, and this is lowering the blood alcohol content to what has been accepted by the CDC, by the National Academies of Science, as the recommended level. When opponents said it would hurt tourism and the restaurant business, some individual cyclists actually wrote in to the governor to urge him not to veto that .05 bill, as was being recommended, saying that they take bike tours through Utah, they eat at restaurants, they stay in hotels, and they did not want to be hit by a drunk driver. They successfully reiterated a basic message, the concept of separating drinking from driving. Bicyclists are really an unexpected constituency for this and many topics. And sometimes, as I remember from that long ago day, seeing Bike Houston with their signs out in the middle of Houston, it takes unexpected advocates for legislators, for the media, and for the public to take notice, as Representative Estes mentioned, related to gun violence. I think that the reason is unexpected advocates add interest and life and depth to an issue. You reframe an issue. And as a bonus, I think you'll make connections that will help you in more specific bicycle efforts as well. That's what I use it for, often. Sometimes I'm speaking about something and I can also include something about bicycle safety. So I think it goes both ways. This example is about drunk driving, but you would be effective advocates for many issues such that would assist bicyclists, which I know some of you already are. Better road infrastructure, distraction, speeding. And by the way, last year Utah did become the first state in our nation to pass the .05 BAC law. So thanks to those bicyclists. Most times, as many of you know, it's a long and seemingly endless effort to advocate for an important safety issue. But cyclists tend to be persistent and tough. You're not very bashful. At the NTSB, we greatly appreciate your dedication to your work. And remember, at the NTSB, we stand ready, and many of us on our bikes. These are just a few of us who bike to work every day. We stand ready to assist. All you have to do is ask. You have immense power to help make our roads safer for other cyclists and for everyone. So thank you, and I greatly appreciate your inviting me to speak today.
We have time for a few questions, and I think we have a microphone. Can't see one over there and one right there, right behind you. Perfect. Yeah, so yeah, go ahead and take some questions.
And there's my information, so please don't hesitate. I also, one of my colleagues, his name is John Brown, so it's a little easier than spelling out Dinh-Zarr. In case you don't remember how to spell my name, it's just John Brown is the other way to get in touch with me. I'm not making that up.
So thank you for your ardent bicycle promotion. Really appreciate it. And I'm sitting next to a friend from Montana who was hit by an 83-year-old gentleman who really probably shouldn't have been driving. And I'm wondering, have you ever investigated age-related issues when it comes to crashes? And my second question, just if you have a moment, is why do you guys still use the word accident? Because there's remarkable consistency in numbers on. So anyways, curious on those.
So I'll start with the first one. And so before my time, the NTSB has investigated crashes that involve older people. And in fact, I actually served on the White House Conference on Aging, and one of the top 3 priorities that the delegates chose was transportation for an aging population, just because of these crashes where older people don't have another way to go and have killed or injured people, like the Santa Monica crash that you might remember from a farmer's market where an older gentleman had pedal confusion. So yes, I mean, and that's just an example of how a community like yours, of ours, a bicycle community, can really make a difference, because we have the baby boomer generation. Some of us are part of it, some of us are a little bit younger, and you know, with that large population, I mean, we need to enable people to get where they need to go safely. And so I think there's a lot of different programs that are coming into place to assist people to have dignified transportation even as they age. But thank you. And let me tell you about the accident. I didn't include that, but what I usually say is, yes, I saw the bad looks when I used the word accident. And I'm from public health, so we were the first people to say, don't use accident. So I know, I should know better. But the reason is, I'm in a primarily aviation environment. And under our congressional mandate, it's called, we investigate aviation accidents and accidents in other modes of transportation. But I try my best, and I probably slipped up this time, when I'm talking about anything related to the roads, bicycles, pedestrians, motor vehicles. I try my best to use crash, but I'm sorry, sometimes the aviation gets in there and I still say accident, so that's the reason. But it is a term of art in aviation and rail. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if, so, do you want to go?
I'm really concerned about the autonomous motor vehicles and their interfacing and detecting bicyclists. And are you looking at that at all yet?
So the question is about autonomous vehicles and whether they how they're interfacing with bicycles and whether we're looking at that. We are, unfortunately, more of a reactionary type agency, so there would actually have to be a death or injury, but we are making our best effort to go out there and talk with the autonomous vehicle manufacturers and the people designing the equipment like the LiDAR and to see what they're doing. So, and we always bring up bicycles, at least I do, because it's a personal interest. So I know there have been articles in the news about bicycles being the most difficult because we're so agile and because we're smaller. So we're certainly keeping that, especially with the number of bicyclists who die on the roads. And I'm sorry, I think you were waiting and I didn't call on you. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. So I work for the city of Little Rock, and we have a state highway that has 24,000 vehicles cross it or go on it every day, but it also cuts through our downtown area. The result is it's the highest, the data show that it's the most dangerous corridor for bicyclists and pedestrians in central Arkansas. Because it's a state highway, I've asked RDOT to ask the US DOT for a road safety audit. Would your agency play a role in that safety audit conversation?
No, unless there is a big accident crash there. I got myself this time. But we do have people from Federal Highways I know who are attending here who you might want to talk with. But no, we only, it's post-crash, once there's been a crash, and then we make recommendations to prevent it again. And that's just part of our mandate that, we can't preemptively go. Yes.
Hi, I'm from Rhode Island, and we're seeing a dramatic rise in traffic fatalities affecting pedestrians and cyclists, but also car-to-car crashes. And one of the reasons that we theorize this is happening is because of cell phone use and texting while driving. It seems to me that there are technology fixes for these kind of crashes, both on, cell phone technology that would make them not work while you're driving, as well as automated pedestrian detection and things that you spoke about with trucks. So are there any plans to install these in automobiles or to require their installation or to work with cell phone manufacturers to make cell phones that simply don't work while you're driving?
Thank you. There are already actually quite a few programs that are already looking at that and determining how to do that. Since we don't regulate, we can't require anyone to do that. But yes, I mean, there's certainly a myriad of companies, some of which have come and presented before the NTSB about different ways, because we've had distracted driving workshops and summits at the NTSB, so we could see what's out there and see the types of technology that's available. And there are probably a dozen or more companies that have that equipment that you can put, even, I mean, the simplest ones for sure, where you can disable or have a message sent to anyone who texts or calls you while your vehicle is moving.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Am I up?
I think so. I think
Hi.
we'll just go back and forth.
Thanks for your
If we have
comments,
time.
and thank you. It's a really hard job. We really appreciate what you do. On average, about 5,000 people are killed every year by large vehicles that are driven by quote-unquote professional drivers. We just had a really serious fatal crash in Boston where the Boston police said it was 100% of the fault of the bike rider, and we actually, they didn't blame the driver at all. Last year, we had 0 commercial airline deaths. Because we hold pilots to a really high standard. Please tell me what your thoughts are on the lack of enforcement and whether or not enforcement is something the NTSB looks at, and what do we need to do to get presumed liability in American law for drivers.
Well, I won't talk about the liability because the NTSB is not allowed to go into that, but I will tell you that we have plenty of recommendations that would bolster your safety advocacy related to trucks, training, enforcement. We've investigated countless crashes involving large trucks, and enforcement is a problem. There is just not enough inspectors out there and the way the inspection is done, and we've made recommendations on those. So we're doing our best to try to advance those to get it's difficult because it's a two-way, but I'm thinking it's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration that is in charge of that. But maybe if if DOT and the Secretary heard more from unexpected champions like yourself, that would make a difference. I think that people just aren't speaking up enough about it. We speak about it all the time. Truck safety is one of our top issues, and we're constantly working to get the regulators to regulate on those. But beyond that, I think that would be a great issue to take up. It's definitely killing a lot of people.
Thank you.
Do we have time? I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So two more. Yeah.
So your answer to Richard's question is a perfect segue to my question. The NTSB does a wonderful job with your expertise, with your forensics, with your ability to do a very well-organized investigation of an incident and a recommendation and response. When you do that, your recommendations and responses are partially formulated and partially constructed with the aid of the industries involved and the expertise of the industries involved. There's a third leg of this, as I see it, which is all of us, those who have expertise as individuals and have done a lot of work on this as individuals. How do we contribute to your forensics and to your recommendations as not a babble of voices that is really difficult to sort out, but as a unified response and a conditioned response that is something that you can factor into your recommendations?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that question. And first of all, just to make clear, we do not work with industry or anyone to make our recommendations. That's one area where we're very strict about. So we have parties to investigations when we do investigations, but all they can do is provide us technical information. If we need to know how your engine works, then we will get that from you. But when we do the analysis, we completely seal ourselves off from the outside world so that we're completely independent, so that we're not influenced by anyone. And in fact, the staff, as Ivan knows, and to my chagrin, won't share it with me until they've completely discussed it amongst themselves. And then they present it before the board in public. And we debate it in public and we vote on it. So it's very transparent. You can see everything, you know, I don't know if you'd want to watch that many hours, but you can see everything on the web. It's all taped. So there's nothing that we do that is not transparent. But more to the idea behind your question, I think, is what can people do? I think people can, like yourselves or groups, individuals, and I've actually had people come to me or write me letters about, this was more on the rail side, but we've been trying to promote positive train control quite a bit, and some, thank you, and some people have not been too happy with me about that, but I always remember that people who have been injured or have people who've been killed have written me letters who say, you know, what can we do? You know, what are your recommendations? Because it's hard sometimes for people to find, you know, our recommendations. So, you know, just ask us. We'll provide you what we've done on that, and then you can present it to your legislators or, you know, people of influence. So I think that is the most important voice. I mean, we can say a lot, we can present a lot of information, but I think it meant so much more for the people who were trying to decide whether to, you know, further extend, for example, a positive train control deadline when they heard from the woman whose back was broken in the Amtrak crash. who wrote to me. So I think if you could do that, and we'd be happy to provide you any information you need. I think you said just one more, right? Sorry.
So NTSB issued a report just a few months ago calling for changes in the way speed limits are set so that they are safe for all road users. What can the bicycling community do to help get more consideration of pedestrian and bicycle mode shares involved in setting reasonable speed limits?
Great question, and we're going to have an entire session on that that Ivan will be speaking. But just briefly, there are, bicyclists and pedestrians were very important stakeholders that we considered in this. And so we have recommendations to every state in the nation related to the setting of speed limits and how they will affect vehicles, but also vulnerable road users. So if you can take those recommendations and push them forward. I know that some city governments are taking them and using them. I've had some calls from cities where the states, maybe they're not quite ready yet. So they've decided to implement some of, or tried to start implementing some of those in certain municipalities instead. So if you can use that, we would be most grateful. And Ivan can tell you more, and I don't want to take up more time. I apologize.
No, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you so much for your graciousness and taking all these questions and for riding with us and being one of us and working to keep us all safe. So thanks everyone for, and once again for Dr. Dinh-Zarr. So that concludes the morning session. Lots of great stuff to go see now and do and participate in. So we'll see you back here at lunch.